So we have a family, my wife and I, of 3 kids, and we're still in a stage where all the kids are still in the house, but we can see the day coming where they're going to be gone, and it's closer. And I like to think back to the days, the younger days, in nostalgic ways. I'm a nostalgic person, all right? And I can get kind of sad when I see a Facebook memory pop up and you see the kids and they're little. And I think back to all the different situations that happened when the kids were really little, you know? And I think back about things that happened that I was sad about, things that happened that I was at fault. It was bad because of me. And I can think about those things, and I don't want to think about those things, and so I try to distract myself and think about other things. But I do think about the time where I was snow plowing out, first winter snow, and this little hand electric snow plow that we had, and Trey was out in the yard kind of helping me, and he was standing off in front of me about 15 feet, and I was pushing the snow this way, and it was spitting it out that way, right toward him. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea, but it hit a rock, and it hit him right in the throat. And he still can't talk today, but he's not bitter about it. But that was my bad. I felt so bad. I almost killed him, and it was sad. But then there's other things that happen that they happen just because that's the way life is, and things happen. And we live in a fallen world, sinful world, and things that are bad are going to happen. And one of those things that happened that were tough, and I still remember it with a slight tear in my eye, is when my son Tyrus broke his arm. We were at I think a T-ball game for Trey in Sheridan, and Ty was playing on the monkey bars, and I was watching the game, and Steph was watching the kids play on there, and he had done the monkey bars fine, but then the second time when he did it, he fell off and landed on his arm and broke both of the bones in his arm. And here's a picture of him at the hospital when we got him there, trying to smile. We told him to smile. You can see his arm in an unnatural position. And I remember that. I remember being in the emergency room, and he's in a lot of pain. I remember riding to the hospital, and I was trying to comfort him. You're going to be okay, buddy. And he had just come off of sickness, hand, foot, and mouth disease. I remember he had that. And then I think he had lost a tooth or something too, and he was in bad shape, but he's putting on a strong face. He's trying to hold back the tears. And then I had to make sure to hold him and to keep him still, and they had to do the x-rays. And it was painful, and it hurt. And I didn't want him to have any pain, but he had to go through the pain because he had to have the x-ray, and he had to get the treatment. And he was old enough to realize, and he knew that we loved him, but at the same time, it hurt, right? And he was going through a difficult time. Well, it was repaired, and we're so thankful for that. And just so you know, the story ended up good. Here it was a few weeks later at the water park, and we put a rubber glove over his cast and taped it up, and it worked out. But I thought about that, and in a lot of ways, that's what happens to us in life. You know, we go through some things. God allows us to experience things, and sometimes they're really painful. And He allows us to do these things. We allowed Ty to play on the monkey bars, right? We allowed him some freedom, and bad things can happen. And then he went to the doctor, and it's supposed to be a good thing, but there was more pain in that. And in some ways, I was allowing it because we knew of a greater good that was going to come from it. And I think that's the way that God works in our lives through painful situations. And we get to go through life and experience the trials of life, sometimes just because they happen, but sometimes because we choose to do what's wrong, and we actually hurt ourselves, but our loving God cares for us enough to work through those painful circumstances to bring about something beautiful, something good. I jotted this down. God allows us to experience the trials of life, but we must trust that He cares for us. If there's one thing that's maybe the hardest thing as a Christian, is to trust God in the trials of life, and to trust that He cares for you in it. And those are the hard things, because sometimes the only thing that we can see is the x-ray machine and the pain of having to sit still, but we don't see the greater picture that God sees. The book of Ruth is going to show us that we can trust God even in the most difficult of situations. And so when we go to the book of Ruth, let me give you a few introduction points to help us navigate the story. It's 4 chapters. We really could take 4 weeks and go through a chapter a week, but we're going to go through it all today. But I promise to get you out supper time around there, okay? And you'll be fine. But the first one is the story takes place in Israel and in the neighboring country or region of Moab. And so you see the story's going to start out with Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their two sons leaving Bethlehem. They're in the Bethlehem region, and they're going to go to Moab. And now Moab is not Israel. They're a Semitic people, meaning they're from the same kind of ancestry as the Jews, but they're not Jews. Actually, Moabites are descended from Lot. If you know Lot from the Old Testament, his wife turned to salt. Okay, so that they're going to leave Bethlehem, go to Moab. Some things are going to happen there, and then they're going to come back to Israel. One of the things that's going to come up as well that we don't have any reference for in our day and age is this idea of a kinsman redeemer. We see this phrase used 7 times in the book of Ruth. What it is this practice of if a man was to die with his wife who was childless, a relative of that man could marry that woman and have kids in his stead, the dead man's stead, to continue his family on, to continue his line on, and to care for his wife, called a kinsman redeemer. And so this relative could marry and take in this widow, and she could be married to him, but continue her family in a way. And that's foreign to us, but we're going to see it here in the book of Ruth. So with those things just in mind, let's go to Ruth chapter 1. Let's read the first 5 verses. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Epathrites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Let's start here. Ruth, we see at the start of chapter 1, is a destitute widow. Not only is Ruth a destitute widow, Naomi is. And actually, if we were to examine the trials that are going on with this family, Naomi probably, on the scale, has got the worst of it. Her husband died, then her 2 sons died, and she's left with her 2 daughters-in-law. So let's look at some of the problems that Ruth had, really the family had problems. The first one, what drove them to Moab, I should say, is that there was a famine. There was a famine. God sends famine. God sends rain. God allows things to happen in our life. And a famine occurs, and so they go to Moab to seek food, really, to seek provision. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that death happens. Elimelech dies, Mahlon and Chilion die, and this is a terrible situation. Look at verse 8, chapter 1. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for this is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So this is a serious situation. Her sons have died. These 2 young ladies, widowed, say, "We want to be with you, Naomi. This is a tough situation. We love you, Naomi." Naomi's saying, "No, go back and find your own families. Find another husband. It's not too late for you." And were you going to wait for me to have more sons for you? Because that's not going to happen. Even if I got married tonight and got pregnant tonight, you're going to wait that long for another husband of mine? No, it's not going to happen. So go yourself, take care of yourself, have your own families. I'm bitter for what the Lord has allowed me to go through, the hand of God upon me. So there's some real problems. So before we look at the response of Ruth, because ultimately Ruth is going to stay with Naomi, Naomi and Ruth then come back, and this is one of the problems they face, to Bethlehem. Look at verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So they go back to Bethlehem with nothing. Nothing. The Lord has brought me back empty, she says, but Ruth is with her. Ruth is with her. So here's the second point. Ruth's pledge. Verse 15. Naomi said to Ruth, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." So Oprah went back. Oprah didn't go back and start a TV show. No, Orpah went back to find her own husband in verse 16. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. This is an amazing thing. Ruth's loyalty to her mother-in-law in this dire situation. Loyalty in our day and age is a rare commodity. To find somebody that is loyal to another person through thick or thin, through sin even against a person, but that a person would be loyal to their friends, to their family, to their spouse, to their God. That's an amazing thing, no matter what the circumstances. They're in a hard spot here. We glaze over it. We're thinking about lunch, at least I am, in about an hour. But they lost all the men in their life. And in this society, without a man there to provide for you, you're in a terrible position. And yet Ruth said, "I'm not going to take care of just myself. I love you, Naomi. You're my mother-in-law. You're my mom. And I'm going to be with you no matter what, till death do us part." That type of loyalty is so rare, but that's what God calls his people to demonstrate. I put this down, and this is really true. I want to just tell you this. Our families, and by our families, I mean our church right here, and not the greater village. I'm talking about our campus right now has numerous families and marriages that are in deep, dark trials right now. Threats of divorce. Divorce actually happened. Separation. Kids rebelling and falling to addiction and darkness. And our families are under attack right now like never before, facing dark times. And to have a husband or a wife who is loyal to his husband or wife and his family, no matter what, that's a rare commodity, but that makes a difference. Even when the spouse has even sinned against you, that you would say, "I'm going to be loyal. I took a vow, I took a pledge, till death do us part." That means no matter what is going to happen, no matter what you've even done, there is forgiveness, there is hope, and my loyalty remains to you. This is the type of loyalty that Ruth demonstrates. Second, we see that chapter 2 now, the new reality sets in for Ruth. She becomes a worker, a desperate worker. No man to provide. Look at verse 2, or chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, whose sight I shall find favor." So they have this thing, it's actually according to the law of Moses, called gleaning in the fields. And the practice is that the farmers, the landowners like Boaz is a man of means. He's got land, he's got workers, he's got employees. When they're going to harvest the field, you leave some of the scraps. You don't purposely take every single thing out of the field. You leave some of the field so that the poor people, the destitute people, can come in, follow in, and clean up and gather some stuff for themselves. They can live. It's kind of it's their version of welfare. So somebody could make a meal out of it. So somebody could have their sustenance in gleaning of the fields. And so this is what we find Ruth doing. Verse 4, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Boaz notices Ruth. Who's this young woman here? And it's Ruth. This is all God's providence to bring Ruth to Boaz, or even another way, to bring Boaz to Ruth. That she would come to glean in his field, to work this field. So God's providence and plan has brought Ruth here, but not only that, his providence has brought about his provision. He's going to provide for Ruth and Naomi through Boaz. Look at verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men here have drawn. And she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, so that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Why? Because it's God's providence. It's God's provision. But Boaz answered, verse 11, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of her husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. This is a beautiful thing. God's providence is to provide through Boaz. Now, it's interesting. Boaz noticed her. Okay, so she's probably a good-looking woman, but that wasn't the thing that kept him interested. What kept him interested was her character. He said, I heard about how you've stayed with Naomi. I heard about how you left your people and your family. You come to Bethlehem because of your love and care and concern for your mother-in-law. I've heard how your husband has died, and now you're here. Hey, come to my field. I'll take care of you. And then they break bread together. Verse 14, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied. And she had some left over. And when she arose to go glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So he's really hooking her up with a great harvest. God is providing for her big time. She was in a desperate situation, but God provided for her in her time of need. Now here's application. We are all in a desperate situation. Whether we know it or not, we're in a desperate situation. We are trapped by the law of sin and death. We are all headed to an eternity away from God, apart from the work of Christ. And this is why we gather. We come together and we talk about lots of different things. Chapter 3, by the way, is going to be so practical. It's the most practical chapter in the Bible. We're going to read some simple things that are going to help all you singles, and it's going to help all us married people and widows. It's going to help us all in chapter 3. It's practical. But we all start at the cross. We must start there, because at the cross we see the holiness of God and the judgment of God brought upon Jesus, who is holy and perfect and without sin or blemish. And so we're at the cross. We see that we're sinful. We're rebellious. We've sinned against God. but Jesus did not. Well, why is Jesus paying for my sin? Why is Jesus dying in my place? Because of the great love of God for us. And he made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us so that we might have the righteousness of God in him. It's what Martin Luther called the great exchange. That Jesus, even though he was perfect, paid for our sin. And we, even though we deserved that punishment, and we are the sinful ones, we receive his perfection. So that now when we stand before God, and you're going to stand before God. You don't know when that day is, but you're going to stand for God to give an answer for your life. But when you stand before God as a follower of Jesus, as trusting in him as your Lord and Savior, God Almighty sees the perfection of Jesus Christ in you. And Jesus took your sin and shame. We're in a desperate position, but Jesus Christ can set you free from the law of sin and death. Now we come to chapter 3. Chapter 3, let's just call it this. We see Ruth as a daring woman. She's a daring woman. What happens in this chapter is amazing. I think it's super practical. Naomi is the one to give her some advice. Look at chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." So here's the plan. Here's the plan. Naomi says, hey, he's at the threshing floor. It's probably April time. All the workers are gathered. They're working in the threshing floor. So there's a lot of people there. It's a public place, but they work there for days on end to finish the harvest. And so Naomi's going to have a plan for her. Look at verse 3. "Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So here's two things that we see from Naomi, two pieces of advice that I think we all can receive today. Okay, so for all the single ladies, you can receive this and it'll help you today. For single men, this will help you. For husbands and wives, this two practical pieces of advice from Naomi will significantly help your marriage. You know what it is? The first one, number one, jot this down, it's not in the notes. Look and smell your best. Look and smell your best. Okay? That's what she says right in the text, verse 3. "Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak. Take care of yourself." Now, she's not saying this to Ruth like be promiscuous, be flirtatious. No, the very fact that has to tell Ruth this shows us that Ruth isn't really concerned about her outward appearance. And Naomi's like, hey, go look your best. Wash up, anoint yourself, put some perfume on, get that good Moabite clothing on, and go over to the threshing floor. And I like that. And I did a little research because times have changed since this was written. This is 3,500 years ago. And I don't know how often they took baths back then, okay? But we do know from history what like people in our day and age have done. We all take a shower at least once a month, right? I take it once a month. But once a day probably, or even more, right? And all throughout our country's history, that's never been the case. You can go back to like the 1860s and 1870s. My wife and I, through our whole 21 years of marriage, we've not found a television show to enjoy together. You know, I want something scary or with lots of action and stuff, and she wants like Teletubbies, you know, and so there's a difference in what we watch or Inside Out or something like that, and so we never found. Well, we found something. Can I tell you this? And we watch it every night now. Little House on the Prairie. We're working our way through this series, and it's incredible. My kids think we're nuts. I tried to invite Ella to watch it last night with us. She's like, that's the most boring show I've ever seen in my life. No, there's good things in Little House on the Prairie, okay? And anyway, back then, there's a point, they took baths about once a week back in the 1860s. Now, you could wipe up and wash up, and Paul Ingalls sometimes would jump in Plum Creek behind the house, but so they did that. But by once a week, take a hot bath. Now you go back to the Middle Ages, and it's no wonder why they had the bubonic plague. It was, and this is true, once a year people would take a bath. And it would happen about May time. And here's what would happen. First person in the hot bath, who do you think it was? It was Dad. It was the man. It was the dirtiest among them, got to go first in the water. And then the wife, and then the kids in order of age, and the youngest, the baby, would be the last one to take a bath in that water. And you can imagine getting down through like 10 people, that water was like black and dirty. And that's where the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater came from. That's an interesting thing. So now go back another 2,000 years. How many times did they bathe? Not much. Okay, so Naomi says to Ruth, take a bath, anoint yourself, go over there. That's a practical advice. Thanks, Naomi. But here's the second one, and all married people should really remember this. It says this, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Here's number 2. So number 1 was practical advice from Naomi. Number 1 was look, where am I? Look and smell your best. And number 2, our people are in a better mood on a full stomach, okay? Remember that. And wives, you have something important to talk to your husband about, and he gets home and he hasn't eaten anything. It would do you well to feed him first, right? And then talk about the things that you want to talk about. It's just a reality. And I'm kind of ornery right now because it's lunchtime, and so don't talk to me about anything that's on your mind until after you eat and you're in a better mood. So this is just practical stuff. And so she goes and tells them to do this. So what does Ruth tells Ruth what to do? Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. So far, so good. He's happy. Verse 7, second part. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I." So this is another thing that we don't practice in our time and in our society. There wasn't anything sexual going on here. There wasn't anything promiscuous or anything like that. It was a practice of showing that Ruth was available to be his wife. And you uncover their feet, they wake up, and she was laying at his feet, saying, "I am here. I'm available." It was a daring thing to do. Don't get me wrong. She was making herself available to him to be his wife because he was a relative who could be her kinsman redeemer. And he says, wow, okay. And we all know he's already interested. He saw her in the field. He invited her over. He had food with her. And now she comes to him and he's like, okay, that sounds good to me. But there's a closer relative. I got to go through the process, make sure he doesn't want to be your kinsman redeemer first. So the plan worked, and the payoff was Boaz said, I am in. I'm in. Here's an application point. And it's just very practical, like the whole chapter. Sometimes you have to take a risk. Sometimes you have to put yourself out there, not only in matters of finances and in your family and in society, but you have to put yourself out there for the Lord. You got to do some things for God, and you got to take some steps that maybe other people think are foolish. And it will require faith on your part, but you're going to step forward. This is a saying that's not in the Bible. Some people erroneously think that it is, but God helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible. That's not true. The point of the cross and the gospel is we can never help ourselves. God needs to help us. God saves us. But it's also true, Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, do it with all your heart. Do it for the Lord. So whatever you do, Go for it. Go for it and live, even in a daring way for the Lord, with your faith to see you through the times when there are hard trials ahead, and you got to trust in God. All right, last one, chapter 4. Here we see Ruth, and she is the delivered wife. She's the delivered wife. First, we have the purchase. Boaz, he goes to the gate in the first 6 verses, and he meets the other guys at the town, and this is the custom that they had. And he says a little bit about what his plan is, and his plan is to be the kinsman redeemer. But he says to this other fellow, who's a closer relative, hey, you're actually first in line as the kinsman redeemer. What do you have to say? Do you want to take her into your household? And verse 6, then the redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. He's like, I can't do it right now. Financially, I can't do it. I can't do this. He didn't have the relationship that Boaz had with Ruth. And so then the prophet for Ruth was that Boaz stepped up. He said, okay, I'm going to be the kinsman redeemer. And then here's the end of the story, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse and the father of David. What a beautiful ending. That Ruth would be the great-grandmother of David, King David. Like Rahab, she would be then ultimately in the line, the ancestral line of Jesus, the Lord, the Christ, the Savior, our Savior. And this is a beautiful thing. Jot this down. God always comes through for his people. God always comes through for his people. And you say, well, wait a second. I know situations that haven't ended like this. I know situations where they ended in tragedy and heartache, and the person wasn't vindicated, and the person wasn't saved. That's how the story ended. But no, wait a second. Boaz is a foreshadowing of Christ. That's who Boaz is. Christ Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. Christ is a man like us, but he's more than a man. So he's our kinsman. He was perfect without sin. But he was just like us and tempted in every way like us, similar to us. He's our kinsman, but he's also our redeemer. And so we do want the storybook ending of Ruth, but we're not guaranteed that. But we are guaranteed that even if you aren't vindicated in this life or rescued right now, that you will win for all of eternity because of Jesus Christ. So take heart. And I pray for you, and it's okay to pray for a victory today. A victory a couple years down the road. But even if it doesn't come, I'm here to tell you, believer, there is victory guaranteed for you by God Almighty. And so let your faith be strengthened. That God cares for you. And so trust him through these difficult times of life.